Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Show. I'm Smitty. We're going to do a 2019 Fantasy Football mock draft. Buckle up. Okay, during this mock draft, I might roll through a couple names in a row. I might comment on some. I'm going to comment on the things that really need commenting, the debatable stuff, maybe the sleepers. Maybe I'll talk about the players that I'm drafting higher than most other people. And then I'll talk about whether you should actually draft these guys maybe where I'm slotting them, or maybe you should let them fall in your draft based on ADP data out there. Kicking it off with the 1.01, you could really argue Zeke Elliott or Saquon Barkley at this pick. They're kind of interchangeable. If I had the 1.01, let's say, in 3 separate fantasy football drafts, I might go Zeke Elliott in one, Saquon Barkley in the other, and surprise some people and go Alvin Kamara in the other. I really think these 3 guys are that good in 2019, and a case can even be made at the 1.01 for Christian McCaffrey. After the top 4, that's when it gets a little crazy, and I think that you could say Melvin Gordon's deserving of the 1.05. You could also call him pretty injury prone. DeAndre Hopkins, you could argue, is the #1 fantasy wide receiver. Some people have Davante Adams. For me, I go Melvin Gordon and Hopkins. I think these are the 2 safest picks at this point. Melvin Gordon does have some injury risk, but he has a ton of TD potential and total yardage potential every single time he's on the field. Melvin Gordon is a beast when healthy. Staying healthy is the big concern with Melvin Gordon. So going back to my earlier example, I wouldn't put all my eggs in one basket with Melvin Gordon either. But in one draft, if I've got the 1.05, I'm not afraid to use that pick on Gordon. DeAndre Hopkins, to me, is the safest wide receiver in 2019 fantasy football. I think that you could make it a case for Mike Thomas to be the #1 wide receiver in fantasy football in 2019, but really, I think they're interchangeable, and you can't go wrong with either. Now, my 1.08 might be different than most people's 1.08, and that's okay. And that kind of leads me to this point. You don't always want to take a guy where maybe I'm mock drafting him or where I'm ranking him on sleeperu.com fantasy football rankings for 2019, because I might be ahead of the curve on it, or I might be trying to predict some things. So draft these guys around their ADP. LeVeon Bell is falling almost to the tail end of the first round. In some cases, LeVeon Bell has gone in the second round. I would expect that to be the exception, not the rule. I think LeVeon Bell safely is going to fall ADP-wise in 2019. His ADP is going to fall in the 10 to 12 range. But at the 1.08, LeVeon Bell, to me, is very deserving. I actually think that by August, I'll be taking, and everybody else will be taking, Le'Veon Bell between 1.05 and 1.06. As soon as Le'Veon Bell finds his landing spot, you're going to see all the negative talk about Le'Veon Bell shift in the direction of that this guy might be a top 4 running back in 2019. To me, I love Le'Veon Bell entering this season, and one of my favorite draft strategies is if you can get him as your second drafted player somehow, whether you're trading your second rounder up or whether you're in an auction draft and you're bidding on one Alvin Kamara type or a McCaffrey type, and then you pair him with Le'Veon Bell. And my approach that I love even more than that, especially in auction, is make Le'Veon Bell your 3rd player. Let's say you spend all your money on a Kamara and a Zeke Elliott, and you have enough money left over to buy Le'Veon Bell and then load your entire team up with free agents or, ad drop guys that are in the $1 or $2 range. I think you can clean up. It all depends on where those running backs go at what value. Sometimes in leagues, running backs like Elliott, Barkley, Kamara, they might cost you half of your budget. So it really depends on your draft. In a regular snake style draft, I have traded, when given one of the top 4 picks out of the hat, I've been able to trade using my 2nd and 4th rounder, been able to trade that pick up into another top 5-ish pick. And then I've been able to trade the additional picks to get up and get a Le'Veon Bell. In one league this year, I actually have draft picks where I have 2 top 5 overall picks, and I have a pick at I believe 1.11, which puts me at having 3 first rounders and literally no depth whatsoever past that point, which I'm fine with because I'm going to end up with an Alvin Kamara, a Zeke Elliott type 1-2 punch, and then Le'Veon Bell or somebody like David Johnson as my 3rd player. And I'll talk about that in a minute as one of my favorite draft strategies for 2019 fantasy football. Jumping into the 1.09, Davante Adams. Davante Adams is ranked really high, and it's deserving. And I'm not saying I doubt him at all, but it is shocking that he is the 2nd ranked wide receiver heading into 2019 fantasy football. It just is. regardless of how he finished. But when you look at the numbers, he was probably the most, if not second, most consistent wide receiver in fantasy football, period. Fantasy football is ever-changing, my friends, and Davante Adams is worth a 1.09. 1.10, I have Odell Beckham. Now, he might fall a little bit further in most drafts. ADP data has him a lot further down the way, but Odell Beckham, I believe, will climb up the ranks as we go into closer to August. And to me, at a 1.10, you can't go wrong with Odell Beckham Jr. Number 11, 1.11, Julio Jones. Where do you rank him in 2019? Some people have him in the top of the first round in 2019 fantasy football drafts. Other people have Julio Jones at the tail end of the second. I think he belongs at the end of the second. The Falcons will be going pass heavy in 2019. They probably won't have a running back that has 200 plus rushing attempts. They're going to air it out, which is great for Calvin Ridley, which is great for Julio Jones. It's great for Matt Ryan. If there is going to be a year where Julio has an outlier season in terms of his TD production, it will be probably this year, assuming he stays healthy. So Julio Jones is a great late first round pick in 2019 fantasy football. David Johnson, 1.12. You are not going to find many people ranking him that high yet, but I expect that to change as the Cardinals revamp during the offseason through the draft, free agency. I think David Johnson buzz is about to kick into gear, which means he will be a top 10 to 12 overall pick in most fantasy football drafts heading into 2019. So come August, I think this will be a staple spot for David Johnson. But right now, just know you can trade for him in Dynasty at a much lower value than this 12th overall slot. So he is one of my favorite go-get players in Dynasty, and he currently, and it could change, one of my favorite players to go get in 2019 fantasy football drafts, especially if he's still lower than this rank heading into August, which I do predict will change. Heading into the second round, now you might be asking yourself, Smitty, you forgot Todd Gurley, you idiot. But guess what? I didn't forget Todd Gurley. I'm making a point here. Would I draft Todd Gurley above the 2.01? Maybe, and it really depends on that league. Can I trade him? Can I trade him at value that is worth top 5, top 6? And you might be able to, because there are a lot of Todd Gurley doubters in 2019. You're looking at probably the biggest one, but there are still a lot of believers. So trade value is important, and sometimes I draft a guy that I don't quite like value-wise, but I know I can trade for him and get even more down the road. So if I can trade into an Alvin Kamara using a little bit of depth or a later draft pick, that's going to be where you see me take Todd Gurley even higher than I'm comfortable with. But I'm going to tell you something. I'm ranking him at 2.01 for a reason, to prove a point. I don't see his value any higher than this come season's end. I think he suffered some big injuries in 2019, misses some time. I think he's hit a wall. Anytime you're dealing with knee issues, you have a history of knee issues in the past. You have one of the heaviest workloads over the last 4 years. You had a 2016 season where I'm surprised you didn't get hurt, and your team doesn't believe in you. You're in the Super Bowl and you don't use Todd Gurley. There's some deceptive tactics going on here, and no one's being honest about this situation, including Todd Gurley, including the team. And for me, all of those combined are a huge, huge red flag. Not to mention, a lot of running backs can fall off the face of the earth in fantasy football value after 5 elite seasons. I don't think after 4 seasons and seeing what we've seen, it's that crazy to think that Todd Gurley has hit his wall. He looks like he's running in mud, and I'm avoiding him at all costs unless I can draft him to trade him. So 2.01, chew on that. Pat Mahomes, 2.02. This is a bit higher than you're going to see in mock drafts and where you might have to take him. So definitely use ADP to your advantage and don't take Pat Mahomes any higher than you have to. But I'm proving a point with this mock draft, telling you to take him lower if you can, but I have him ranked here. And if his ADP climbed to 2.02, I'd pay it. He can win you a league. Dalvin Cook is going to fall a lot farther than 2.03. But let me tell you something. He has a ton of value from even this draft slot, and this isn't even his ADP. Take him in the mid to late second round, but know that I'd take him with ease at 2.03 because Dalvin Cook is a top 5 running back wrapped up inside the value of a second round pick, a mid to late second round pick. That wins you a league, just like David Johnson will win you a league if David Johnson remains deep in the second round, or even at the mid range of the second round, or even at the top range of the second round. Dalvin Cook, David Johnson, top 5 running back upside guys wrapped up in the values of a second round player. I mean, should we just end the mock draft right there? James Conner 2.04. I've talked about James Conner a ton. I predicted his rise last year. He was my #2 bold prediction. I think I get a little say here. He doesn't have a resume that supports that he can handle this kind of workload in Pittsburgh. This is Pittsburgh. They run so much through the running back. It's unfair to expect a running back to stay healthy. I think people forget how special LeVeon Bell is when they try and compare James Conner to him. And honestly, Jalen Samuels, he has his running backs coach, Eddie Faulkner, used to be his coach in college at NC State. He loves Jalen Samuels. Jalen Samuels did really well in place of James Conner when James Conner got hurt, because James Conner did break down last year. Already proved that he may not be able to handle the workload that the Pittsburgh Steelers want to funnel through him. James Conner's worth a first-round pick? I don't think so. If you want to take James Conner in the first round, be my guest. Coming from a James Conner believer from last year, once the value gets so high, folks, the scale tips, you have more risk than you have reward. Avoid James Conner in the first round in 2019. If you can get him in the second round, this 2.04 range is okay, especially if you handcuff him to Jalen Samuels. But guess what? This will be the year that people get cute and go and reach for Jalen Samuels in 2019 fantasy football drafts so that you can't draft him. So make sure you reach quite a bit, at least an extra round, to get Jalen Samuels cuffed to your boy James Conner if you're believing in 2019. I'm staying away because I can get Antonio Brown. I can get a Patrick Mahomes. I can get a David Johnson. I can get a Dalvin Cook. I'm taking those guys over James Conner in 2019 fantasy football. Chew on that. Antonio Brown at 2.05. Probably going to go later in most current drafts and drafts you'll see in the coming weeks. But Antonio Brown, once he finds his landing spot, will he be a top 12 pick? Maybe. So I'll rank him here at 2.05, and I'd take him there if his ADP climbed. But as we talked about with Cook, as we talked about with Mahomes, let these guys fall, and David Johnson, if you can. If the ADP data supports that you can draft them, so let's say 2 weeks from now, you could draft them in the mid to late second. Do it. But don't be afraid to take Cook, Mahomes, Antonio Brown, or all of these guys that I'm mentioning that have monster appeal from even those values. Don't be afraid to take them at the top of the second. They can easily earn you your value back at that even higher range where I'm slotting them. Mike Evans. How can you argue 2.06 value when he can outscore really anybody above him in that second round? So that's not something you can argue. Tyreek Hill at 2.07 is pretty good. Juju Smith-Schuster at 2.08, a little high at a glance, but he could earn that value. So I'm not going to call him a bust or a reach here. It would just be nice if someone would let him fall into the third round. I'm just saying, it would be nice. So ADPs, be gentle, show us that he can fall further than this 2.08, but he is worthy of this draft slot. 2.09 Joe Mixon. Why is he so low? Because I doubt him. The Bengals brought in a QB coach as their offensive coordinator. The Bengals brought in a QB coach as their head coach. They are not an experienced crew. They have Andy Dalton throwing the football, who's coming back from injury, and AJ Green's coming back from injury. I do like Tyler Boyd a lot. I think the Bengals will be down and throwing the football a ton in the second half of football games in 2019. That spells a lot of good targets for Tyler Boyd and really AJ Green if he can stay healthy. But do I think they're going to win games? No. Do I think the defenses are going to crowd the box? Yes. Do I trust Joe Mixon on and off the field? No, I do not. All of those things combined are a lot of red flags to toss at your second drafted player. So I'm avoiding if possible, and I don't think I'll own him in any leagues because where I'm comfortable taking him, he will not be. Travis Kelce. I never draft a tight end in the second round because I walk out of drafts going, I just don't like my team. There's a lot of holes everywhere. I like to be the guy that's grabbing the next Travis Kelce. So David Njoku is a tight end that I think could have a huge monster breakout season in Cleveland as Cleveland revamps their offense and becomes one of the most aggressive fantasy football offenses in fantasy football in 2019. You want a guy? David Njoku, draft him instead of reaching for your tight end. But Kelce is arguably worth this value, and if you drafted him here, just like Joe Mixon, you could essentially trade them for a player that's up above, that's a little safer, that you weren't able to snag. So there are reasons, again, that I would draft somebody like Kelce or Mixon, and that's why they are slotted here, because this is my mock draft. Smitty, why are you even drafting Mixon at all? Because I can trade him. Nick Chubb, same thing. I wouldn't want him here. His value seems to be very good here in terms of trade value, so you can trade him. But Nick Chubb, unless you can handcuff him to Kareem Hunt, which you probably could do if you make sure you draft Hunt high enough, it's a decent running back. It's a decent running back 2 to have for sure, with running back 1 appeal. But I'm not comfortable taking Nick Chubb here because there's other better options. But again, trading him would be an option if I did have to take him. Devonta Freeman's probably going to fall into the 3rd round. Just know that. But I think this is where his value could be end of year. 3.01. Guess what? I'm crazy. Other people aren't factoring in the rookies yet. I am. 3.01 is going to be my first rookie running back, and I predict that this might be low after we see the landing spot. So you want rookies mixed into your mock drafts, you're looking at the guy that does it. Aaron Jones, 3.02. Word is that the Packers may use a running back by committee to keep him healthy, but he does have low running back 1 appeal. So 3.02 isn't too big of a risk, but I'd say that if you're reaching a little higher than that, be careful because he does have trouble staying healthy. He's a bit unproven, and I think that you don't know what you're going to get with Aaron Jones in 2019 fantasy football. Next up, Derrick Henry has running back 1 appeal, but he's going in the 3rd round, maybe 4th. I don't know. AJ Green has a ton of appeal as a 3rd rounder. He has some risk, so it's warranted to let him fall, but at some point you got to say, hey, this could be a top 5 wide receiver still, maybe. So I'm going to take him at 3.04 without hesitation. T.Y. Hilton always produces, gets underrated. Even me. Why am I underrating him? I don't know. I can't help myself. Why am I T.Y.? I'm sorry. Amari Cooper has always had the appeal of a wide receiver 1, but he's failed us a ton. So I think it's a pretty safe place to put him in the 3rd round. In hopes that he does continue to do well, but I'm not going to take him higher than that because he has failed all of us. But he was on my bold predictions in 2017, he was on my bold predictions in 2018, and I was about to crap the bed until he got traded. Just continue doing it, Amari. Please stop making me look like a fool year after year. Keenan Allen is really low in this mock draft. I have to draft him at some point, but I do have doubt about him. I think Mike Williams will eventually overtake him. Crazy? Oh, yeah, well, that's the way I roll. I'm going to take Keenan Allen at some point because I can trade him, but I do doubt him in 2019. Damian Williams. What a awesome opportunity. Damian Williams is a tough player to rank in 2019 because you don't know if he'll be the starter. What if they draft somebody in the draft? What if they trade for a player or they sign LeVeon Bell? Then Damian Williams is holding water bottles for LeVeon Bell when he was about to be a top 5 running back. So taking him higher than the 3.09 is risky. I think this is a good spot for him. If he ends up being the lone starter in Kansas City and you get him at this kind of value, that's how you win a league. Kerryon Johnson. The Lions are going to run in 2019. They are going to change their offense a ton. And this is like Marshawn Lynch days. This coaching staff is going to do what they did with Marshawn Lynch with Kerryon Johnson. If he can stay healthy, he's a top 10 running back trapped in a low 3rd round type value. That is a monster steal. There's a little risk. Can he stay healthy? We don't know. Cuff him to whoever the backup is. That combined starter is going to be really good in 2019. Everyone said Philip Lindsay, who at some point last year, now they're like, Philip Lindsay. Yeah, I knew him. I had him ranked in my top 3 or 4 for running backs in January. Then he got hurt. Then he got bumped from the combine. And no teams were looking like they believed in him. Even Denver looked like they didn't believe in him too much because they drafted, Freeman and Lindsay. And you're like, oh, this is confusing. Who's going to, how can he climb the ranks this high? And then, whoa. He is the starter. Philip Lindsay has a ton of value at the late 3rd round range in 2019 fantasy football drafts and rankings. Should you rank Philip Lindsay above guys like Damian Williams, above guys like Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones? You could. I'm not saying you're crazy. Damian Williams should have a higher 2019 fantasy football ranking than this. He should. But it's just a little risky going into 2019, not knowing if Freeman's going to get more work. Is Lindsay going to hold up? 3.11 is a good spot for Lindsay, and he still has a lot of upside. Leonard Fournette. I do not like Leonard Fournette. I made this clear last year. He was on my bold prediction list as the only bust candidate. Everything else was a positive prediction. I'm not changing my tune with Leonard Fournette. He was almost written off months ago by the Jaguars, and now he's back to being a third or fourth rounder. I take him here if I can trade him at this value, but if I feel like I can't, I let him fall. I let him fall until he's just not my problem. I dance around this value until it's just not there anymore. I almost feel like I got to redo this mock draft, because like looking at it right now, it makes me uncomfortable that I have Leonard Fournette tagged to my name as a third-round pick. Your steal of the 2019 fantasy football draft. A guy that is in the top 2 fantasy football rankings at his position for 2019, Aaron Rodgers, is sitting there in the 4th round to be stolen. Do you feel like winning a league much? There probably is no bigger steal right now in 2019 fantasy football drafts than Aaron Rodgers in the 4th round. And man, you pair Rodgers and David Johnson, or Rodgers and Cook, with an Elliott, a Kamara, a McCaffrey, and you were on your way to domination in 2019. Stephon Diggs, Robert Woods, Sony Michel, Marlon Mack, the second rookie running back. There it is again. I'm getting creative here. Kenny Golladay, Brandon Cooks, Chris Carson, Deshaun Watson, George Kittle, Zach Ertz. All these guys you could put them in a blender. Who knows who's going to be the best, minus Aaron Rodgers, probably belonging in the 3rd round. Who knows what's going on? Will Sony Michel get all the carries? Will he stay healthy? Is Robert Woods for real, or will Cooper Kupp take away from him? All of these guys have some questions. George Kittle and Zach Ertz probably have the least questions, but you take a tight end early. My strategy is to wait. Guys that missed the cut: Calvin Ridley, Tariq Cohen, Tyler Boyd, Darius Geis, Andrew Luck, Jarvis Landry, Allen Robinson, Jerick McKinnon, Chris Godwin, Doug Baldwin, Cooper Kupp, 3rd rookie running back, and a long list past that. Who do you take? Who belongs in the 4th round that didn't, either from the guys on this list or another guy that I didn't even name? Who belongs in the 4th round or the 3rd round that wasn't slotted? Because I don't care who you are, no one's going to agree fully with your mock draft. So I expect to have a bunch of pushback all over the place. That's par for the course when you're doing a mock draft, especially to the masses. But I'd love to hear your comments. Tell me who you would have put where. Going back to my favorite draft strategy, if you got Aaron Rodgers in the 4th, you got Ezekiel Elliott in the 1st, you grabbed a David Johnson or a Dalvin Cook in the 2nd, and you got like a Stephon Diggs or an AJ Green in the 3rd. That is one of the best looking strategies I can come up with heading into early 2019 fantasy football drafts and 2019 fantasy football mock drafts. So if you want 2019 fantasy football rankings, get on over to sleeperu.com. We have these kinds of rankings for 2019 up all year round. We have 2019 fantasy football QB rankings. We have 2019 fantasy football running back rankings. We have 2019 fantasy football wide receiver rankings. 2019 fantasy football tight ends. Running backs, QBs, tight ends, wide receivers. Looking at the big picture now, here is your 2019 fantasy football mock draft that we just did in order on one screen so that you can see who went where and take a gander at my personal 2019 fantasy football mock draft. This is how I'd rank it based on skill and based on trade value. But again, please remember that some of these guys are going higher than you need to take them in your current draft. I'm merely making points with some of the players like Mahomes, David Johnson, Dalvin Cook, Antonio Brown. These are all players that I think you can get a little bit later, so make sure you trust and use your ADP. Now, highlighted in green are all the guys I think can extremely outperform their draft positions in 2019 fantasy football. So you want, you could say sleepers, even if they're big name players. These guys are being slept on, I think, in terms of their upside versus their cost. So make sure you take a look at LeVeon Bell, David Johnson, Pat Mahomes, Dalvin Cook, Devonta Freeman, the 1st rookie running back. I don't care who it is yet. I can still say that running back, whoever I rank as the top running back, is going to be worthy of much more than the 3.01. Derrick Henry, Aaron Rodgers, again, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, value in 2019 fantasy football. Robert Woods, the 2nd rookie running back, and Deshaun Watson. This next group I'm going to highlight in red are the guys that I think are getting drafted too high, that have too much risk. You have Todd Gurley, James Conner, Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, Adam Thielen, Keenan Allen, Leonard Fournette, and Sony Michel. All guys I think that could leave you hanging given the cost, so please be careful where you draft those guys. And probably my 5 favorite picks, if I had to narrow down the green group, I would say Bell, David Johnson, Pat Mahomes, Dalvin Cook, and Aaron Rodgers are my favorite picks of the top 4 rounds. If I had to narrow it down to 5 values that I think could absolutely explode from their draft value, those are my 5. Bell, Johnson, Mahomes, Dalvin Cook, Aaron Rodgers. Those guys, I think, can win a lot of leagues in 2019. There you have it. That's my 2019 fantasy football mock draft. We talked about a lot of 2019 fantasy football rankings mixed into that because they go hand in hand. But I think that gives you a good heavy dose of reality from what Sleeper U can bring to the table in terms of getting you ahead of the curve, while also talking about, you know, how we are drafting some of these guys too high to prove a point. So make sure you go into your draft with ADP data and a good sense of where guys are going. And so when you see Pat Mahomes ranked at 2.02 from me, you know you're getting a screaming deal if he falls to the late second or even early third. That would be insane value. Same thing for Dalvin Cook, David Johnson, and Aaron Rodgers in the 4th. So join us next time. Thanks for joining us for this 2019 fantasy football mock draft. If you haven't subscribed to the Fantasy Football Show on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe, click the bell so we can ring a ding ding once we have new updates. You don't want to miss a thing. And get on over to sleeperu.com for your year-round fantasy football rankings, QBs, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. We have year-round 2019 fantasy football rankings at sleeperu.com. We are crazy. Our bold predictions are already out. We only have like 12 to 14 bold predictions written every year, so it's not like I take 100 stabs in the dark. Number 1 written prediction last year, Patrick Mahomes would be an elite top 1 to 5 fantasy QB. My number 2 bold prediction, James Conner and Jalen Samuels would win a league for people, written in August. The list goes on and on. I believe number 6 and number 7 was Leonard Fournette would bust. We don't take random stabs in the dark. Sleeperu.com, bold predictions, thefantasyfootballshow.com for all of your video content. Get some, buckle up. 2019 is here. We are year round.